Breaking news: a new bill introduced in Congress has the entire nation buzzing, because if it passes, millions of Americans could legally carry their firearms across all 50 states. This is not a rumor, not a proposal buried in committee, not a symbolic message bill. This is a direct, forceful, nationwide challenge to the way America handles gun laws, and it is already igniting one of the loudest political and legal battles in years. Supporters are calling it the most significant federal move to protect gun rights since the 1980s, while opponents are sounding alarms that this would rewrite the rules of American public safety. And as of right now, both sides agree on one thing. This bill, if enacted, could transform the daily lives of millions of gun owners instantly. This isn't just a story about politics. This is a story about national power, constitutional rights, furious opposition, and the possibility of a historic shift. For the first time in American history, lawmakers are moving toward a single national standard that would override decades of conflicting state restrictions and force recognition of lawful carry permits from coast to coast. What's in this bill? Why did it explode onto the national stage now? Who is fighting it and who is determined to push it through? And, most importantly, could this actually pass Congress and become the law of the land? You need to hear this. What sparked this bill is a level of legal and political chaos that has been quietly building for years. Across the country, some states have moved toward more freedom, expanding constitutional carry and reducing restrictions. Meanwhile, other states have tightened their laws, creating strict permit systems, limiting access, and imposing harsh penalties for technical violations. Gun owners who travel across state lines often face a minefield of conflicting rules. You can be perfectly legal in your home state, only to become a criminal the moment you cross a border, sometimes without even realizing it. There are Americans who have been arrested, charged, or detained simply for transporting their lawfully carried firearm the wrong way through the wrong state. Lawmakers behind the bill say this chaos violates constitutional rights, undermines national fairness, and creates a two-tiered system where your fundamental freedoms depend entirely on geography. The motivation is simple, at least from their perspective. If you're legal in your state, you should be legal in every state. Their argument is that national rights deserve national protection, and fragmented laws should not be allowed to interfere with the exercise of a core constitutional guarantee. So what does the bill actually do? At its heart, the bill creates nationwide concealed carry reciprocity. That means if you have a valid permit or if you're from a constitutional carry state, that authorization would apply in all 50 states. You would no longer be at the mercy of local prosecutors or confusing local statute. Instead, your permit would function the same way your driver's license does, valid everywhere. The bill protects lawful travelers, blocks states from prosecuting people purely for crossing borders, and aligns itself with the Supreme Court's modern Second Amendment rulings. It does not force states to issue permits. It does not change private property rules. It does not eliminate background checks. What it does is create a unified national standard that recognizes lawful carry on a federal level. Lawmakers who designed the bill say their intention is simple: not to change issuing rules, but to ensure that once you have a lawfully obtained permit, it works everywhere in the country, without exception. Supporters of the bill argue that it restores equal constitutional rights across the nation. They believe the right to bear arms should not vanish the moment you step into a different state. Their view is anchored in one core argument: rights do not stop at state borders. They say the Second Amendment is a national right, protected by the Constitution, and therefore must be respected nationwide. They also point to the Supreme Court's recent rulings, which have emphasized historical tradition, individual rights, and limits on states creating excessive burdens. Supporters argue that the bill is not radical, it is simply bringing the legal treatment of firearms in line with the way the Constitution already treats other rights. They see this as restoring fairness to millions of responsible gun owners who travel for work, family, or emergencies and should not have to live in fear of accidentally violating unknown local rules. In their eyes, national reciprocity is long overdue, and the bill finally delivers what the Constitution always promised but the states refuse to acknowledge. Opponents, however, see the bill as dangerous, extreme, and a direct threat to state authority. They argue that it strips states of their power to set public safety laws tailored to their populations. Governors from strict states say the bill forces them to accept what they call weaker standards from other states. They warn that states with looser requirements could become the default standard nationwide. Their argument hinges on the idea that states have traditionally controlled carry laws, and federal involvement would undermine that structure. Some claim the bill sets up major constitutional conflicts over federal authority, and several states have already signaled their intent to sue if the bill passes. They argue it violates the 10th Amendment and is an overreach of federal power into state-level decision-making. This has created one of the most intense divides in recent legislative fights, with both sides preparing for what they expect to be a massive legal and political showdown. That showdown will revolve around a core constitutional question: can Congress set a nationwide standard for a right that states have historically regulated? Or do states retain final authority over carry rules within their borders? Supporters of the bill argue that the 14th Amendment gives Congress the power to enforce constitutional rights against state interference, and that national reciprocity is simply the modern enforcement of that principle. Opponents argue that the 10th Amendment limits federal involvement and that the bill crosses a line that has never been crossed before. Legal experts are already warning that this bill could trigger one of the most significant constitutional fights in decades, one that may ultimately land in the Supreme Court. And with the court's current Second Amendment direction, opponents fear the justices could uphold a national standard and weaken state-level restrictions permanently. The political and legal stakes could not be higher. But even with all this energy, passion, and controversy, the big question remains: can it actually pass? The political battlefield is unpredictable. Some lawmakers are all in, calling this a once-in-a-generation opportunity to protect gun rights nationally. Others vow to block it at every stage. The Senate will be the deciding arena. A handful of moderate votes, just a few, could swing the entire future of this bill. The White House position is also critical. A supportive administration could transform the bill from a long-shot idea into a real legislative possibility. A hostile administration could threaten a veto. The bill's fate depends heavily on political timing, election results, and shifting alliances in Congress. If even a small shift occurs in the balance of power, the bill's chances could dramatically change overnight. The nation is watching closely, because what happens next could alter the entire legal landscape of gun rights in America. If this bill becomes law, the impact would be enormous and immediate. Gun owners could legally carry nationwide without fear of crossing into legal danger zones. Travel would become drastically simpler for millions of Americans. The complicated patchwork of state regulations rules that change from block to block and county to county would rapidly lose power. But that doesn't mean the fight ends. States would almost certainly file lawsuits immediately, triggering years of court battles that could test the limits of federal authority and reshape the interpretation of the Second Amendment. Supporters would celebrate a historic victory. Opponents would prepare for a long legal war. The day the bill becomes law would be the day the entire nation shifts, not gradually, not slowly, but instantly. Whether you support national reciprocity or oppose it, one thing is clear: everything changes the moment this becomes federal law, and right now, we are closer to that possibility than ever before. Supporters are energized. Opponents are mobilizing. The political world is on edge. The constitutional world is bracing for impact. And for the millions of gun owners who have waited decades for nationwide protection of their rights, this moment feels like history knocking on the door. The question is no longer whether this bill will trigger nationwide debates, national media panic, and fierce courtroom clashes. It already has. The real question is what happens next, and whether America is about to enter an entirely new era of Second Amendment freedom. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over, and the stakes couldn't be higher.